50 rejections, and most guys haven't even been rejected 50 times in their life. Most guys drop their standards to the overweight women, the 4 out of 10s, by the time that they've been rejected 5 times. It takes that small of a time in order for them to go for the settlement and woman that they know that they can do better than. But even if you do 50, which is way above average in terms of the number of rejections until you drop your standards, to me, that is still nothing. That is absolutely nothing. Okay guys, and welcome back to another video on Honest Waffles. And as you can see, the background is a little bit different to my regular uploads, and it is going to stay that way. Just to give you a quick update on my life, because I've recently moved into this new apartment, and it's a super nice apartment. I'll have to give you a tour sometime, but just to let you know why the background is a little bit different, it's because I've recently moved, and it's going to be that way for at least the next year, depending on if I stay here for any period longer. But anyway, without wasting time on some pointless update about my life, let's get into the actual material now of what I'm going to be discussing in this video. And as you've seen by the title, this video is going to be all about what I've identified as the 2 biggest concepts that all men must understand. They need to ask themselves these 2 questions. Both these 2 questions are equally important if they want to live an optimal dating life. And if they don't, then chances are they'll probably end up with a woman who looks somewhere in the league of this lovely lady in the top right hand corner, who, let's be realistic here for 2 seconds, you know, without being disrespectful at the same time, just objectively speaking, it's probably about 4 out of 10 in terms of attractiveness, if she's lucky, and that is. Most guys wouldn't dream of wanting to be with a woman like this. However, a lot of guys end up settling for a woman in this caliber just because they don't really have any options, and they end up making the 2 mistakes, the 2 concepts that I'm going to be outlining in this video. And it's way more common than you think. And just to say one more point, this isn't going to be some wishy-washy, you've heard a million times before on YouTube talking points where it's like, just go to the gym, bro, and then you're going to be fine, and just be confident, just approach women, bro. Like, you know, all of the same regurgitated messages that you've heard from all of the other millions of other content creators in this space who just turn on the meat grinder, pump out the same message, said in a slightly different way for every video. It's not going to be like that at all. I'm going to be giving genuine, honest advice, feedback that is original, that you've not heard before in this space. And these 2 concepts are so important. If you don't grasp them, then I'm sorry to say, but this is just a sad reality. You will end up with a woman like this, and I don't think that's a very ideal outcome. So just to give you a basic outline of the story, this is like a story that I think most guys will be able to relate to, at least to some degree. And if they carry on with this same storyline long enough in their life, then it is going to result in this terrible outcome of being with this woman long-term in a long-term relationship or marriage. And the story goes, try to relate to this, as a guy gets rejected by a girl, and then he thinks to himself, oh, I've been rejected again. The attractive women don't want me. I tried approaching the 6s and the 7s and the 8s, and now they don't want me. So the conclusion that he comes from that is, maybe I should lower my standards. Maybe it's the overweight women that are for me, the women that are less desirable, the seconds choices, and the women that no other guys are really after, because they all mutually understand as well that these women aren't all that attractive. And a lot of guys come to that conclusion, and it's based on an emotional thought process. They don't really think long term and see the probability, the long term odds that they could actually be successful with a reasonably attractive woman. You know, maybe not the most attractive woman in the world, not a 9 or an 8, but at least an average to above average woman who most guys will be happy with in a long-term relationship. You know, as a man, that you've really reached a low point once you start genuinely trying to approach and attract women on this level, because that's when you're in a really desperate, dire situation. And if you're still getting rejected by those, which is happening more often nowadays, because the more men that adopt this desperate mindset means that these women end up becoming even more so entitled themselves. And That's why as a man you want to stay out of that negative feedback loop. But you guys already know most of this stuff anyway. I've made 100 videos on it on the main channel discussing those same points, so I won't delve too deeply into all of that. But I just want to make one thing absolutely crystal clear before I get into the two most important concepts, and that is a prerequisite. When I'm making all of these points for the remainder of the video, and in fact for the first few minutes that this video has gone on for as well, this one prerequisite holds true. And that prerequisite means that you need to be at the very, very least a 6 out of 10 in terms of SMV or above. So for you guys that are in that category and you are a 6 or above, then you should gobble up all of this information in this video, absorb it like a sponge, and all of the points are going to be relating to you. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever you would ever need to, in your life, resort to these last resort options, these unattractive women like this. However, if you're a 5 or below, then you need to either try and get to a 6 or above, or you might as well just stop watching this video because the content is going to relate to you. Come back in 6 months' time, once you've actually reached a 6 SMV or above, and then you should watch this and it's going to be beneficial. But this video is only applicable to guys that are a 6 or above. If you're a 5 or below, then it doesn't really relate because you're more gambling in a sense in the dating market by that. It's no guarantee that you're actually going to end up with an attractive or at least average to above average woman. It's possible, but you're almost gambling. You're betting on a horse to come through that is like, you know, 4th favourite to win. However, if you're a 6 or above, then absolutely, there is no reason whatsoever you won't be able to attract at least an average to above average woman in terms of SMV and have her in a long-term relationship with genuine desire that's going to be a good mother of your children in the future. So I wanted to make that point crystal clear. So we're going to get into the main content now, but just one more reminder, and I'm only bringing this up because a lot of people in the comments of my recent videos have been asking like, oh, wheat, what's all of this stuff about water retention? So a lot of you guys know that I've released my Looksmaxxing program, Looksmax by 2 points in 24 hours program, which goes deeply into how you can use water retention, hair, facial hair, skincare, etc. in order to become more attractive, go from this to this to this in just 24 hours. And just to give you a quick idea of what I mean when I say water retention, I can't give the exact material, but you can see this visual example at the very least. So in this image here on the left, there's been zero editing to either of these two photos. But in the image on the left, you can see the cheeks look rounded, the jawline looks rounded, it's all puffy, unattractive, and no woman is going to want to go near this guy. It's almost got like a creepy appearance, and I'm allowed to say that because I'm judging myself. But you get the idea of what I'm talking about. It's just not an attractive photo, and that's mainly because of the water retention that's being held in the face. Whereas if you look at this image on the right, and even more so this image on the far left, there is a massive difference where the face looks miles leaner. And these images were all taken within the same few months. They've all been taken this year in 2023. So it's not a body fat percentage issue, because otherwise, you know, that might have materialized over a year or two. This is very recently taken photos, and I promise it's got nothing to do with body fat percentage. It's all water retention. And if I wanted to, I could even replicate this photo by doing negative water retention if I wanted to. So if you want to find more about this concept, then just check out in the description. You'll see a link to a video where I explain more about the program, all of the material you'll receive, if this is interesting to you. And again, I would only recommend this for guys that are like at least 5 and above. So if you're 3, you know, it's not really a point in terms of buying this program. It's not going to help you. But if you're a 5 or above, then this absolutely will be beneficial, and I couldn't recommend it enough. So check the description video if you're interested in that. But now let's get on with the actual main content of the video. And the first question that I want every single guy to think about is, what is the most important decision that you'll ever have to make in your life? Some people would say it's what career path you're going to go down. Some people will say it's like the degree that you take, or you know, what you decide to do with your life, if you go traveling or decide to start a family early, having children, things like that. But what I would argue, and this has been underpinned by one of the most influential investors in history, Warren Buffett, which is very surprising because in terms of his financial knowledge, you might have guessed that he would have said the most important decision that anyone would ever have to make is what you invest into, where you put your money, if you've got a lot of investments, things like that. However, he actually said something different. And the thing that he said, and I couldn't agree more, the most important decision you'll ever have to make to reach success is marrying the right person. I'll say that again. The most important decision you'll ever have to make to reach success is marrying the right person. And this is from arguably the most influential investor in history. I'm going to just shut that window quick because you might be able to hear that siren. But anyway, getting into why it is the most important decision you'll ever have to make. Well, it's quite obvious if you think about it for anything longer than 2 minutes. The person you marry, well, first and foremost, they're going to be the mother of your children. So that's going to be relevant in terms of genetics, because these are the children that are going to be your legacy, the ones that you're going to raise for at least 18 years of their life. And if you have 2 or 3 of them, it might even end up being like 25 or 30 years of your life that you're going to be invested in these children. So genetically speaking, it's very important that their mother is healthy, has good genetics, and is, average to above average height, potentially, has a good facial structure. So your wife gives birth to children that are genetically adequate. And secondly, in terms of the mother's behavior, it is also important that she is able to raise them adequately, and the children are raised in a strong, stable family household with good motherhood and fatherhood, where they're both bringing their respective skill sets to the table and are able to raise the children correctly and will raise them into strong, competent men or nurturing and caring women. And the process repeats, and those children end up having families on their own, and you essentially have this whole legacy, this pyramid, where you now have this generation of future children being born, and they are all instilled with the same values, and they're strong, and they are going to continue on your legacy. So I think you get the idea of that. It's also important for your own emotional well-being and benefit, because if you marry the wrong woman, then you're going to have potentially 40 years worth of headaches and heartache, and it's going to cause you a lot of problems. And if things go south, then it's going to cost you a whole lot financially if she ends up divorcing you. And again, that's going to tear up the family. If it causes all of those problems, it's going to ruin your life, it's going to ruin your children's life. It's just a terrible thing if you marry the wrong woman. So, now I've given a quick explanation, I think it's quite clear to see why it's so important that you marry the right person. However, given this very important decision, the fact that it's the most important decision that you'll ever make, I find it very, very surprising that so many men almost rush into finding the woman that they eventually want to settle down with. And the reason that they do that is out of emotional thinking, and they're very desperate. And I think the usual chain of reasoning goes is that they get rejected a few times by attractive women, and then they're really desperate. They're like, oh, what if I never find anyone? I can't die alone. I'm going to have to find someone someday. Let me lower my standards. I'm going to go for the first woman that looks in my direction and gives me a chance. And all of the standards that they should hold, such as her attractiveness, such as her personality, such as her values, her purity, goes straight out of the window, because all of these guys are thinking about is, oh, I need to alleviate this short-term loneliness as fast as I possibly can, so I'm going to rush into this decision and go for the first woman that gives me a chance, because all of the women before that rejected me, and I'm going to settle down with this woman, even though I know deep down that she wasn't the one that I should have been with long-term. And I would say that this is the way of thinking that most guys end up going down in their life. And when you just look around for 2 seconds, if you look around at the adults that you know that are with women and they've been married for a good amount of time, just ask yourself, could you envision yourself being in that man's shoes? If you was in that man's shoes and you'd been married to this woman who was average to below average in terms of looks and values and purity, you got to ask yourself, would you be happy if you was that man in that marriage? A lot of people like to bring up that phrase, happy wife, happy life. And if you're a man with a unattractive, unhappy, miserable woman who has, got a lot of problems, then if you're a man in that position, would you really want to be satisfied with that? And when you think about it and you try to analyze all of the guys that you know who are adults who have been in marriages, or even the ones that are on the verge of about to be making that decision, so they're in a long-term relationship with a woman that they're on the fence about, they're considering getting down on one knee and marrying that woman, staying with her for the rest of their life, or potentially less if it ends up in a bit of divorce. If you envision that you was that guy in that person's shoes, would you genuinely be satisfied with being in that man's relationship, which would eventually lead to a marriage long term? Because if you break down and you actually collect a sample size of all of the men you know in this position, I guarantee you that 80% of them or so, roughly, you would not be satisfied with their particular woman. You would be thinking, oh, this is a bit of a settlement. I don't think it's a wise decision for my friend, my buddy, to be in that decision. And the fact that he's actually considering marrying this chick, I couldn't see myself doing the same. And if you just think for 2 seconds about all of the men that you know in your life who are in that position, I'm pretty sure you would end up coming to the same conclusion as I have, that most guys in these relationships with these women, you wouldn't want to be in their same relationship because you think that either they can do better, the woman's not good enough, and you get the idea. So it's just not a good position to be in. But the point is, and what I want to drill home on this first important concept, is that despite all of, everything that I've just said, that most of these guys are in relationships / marriages where they are or would be unsatisfied if they were with them long term, despite all of that stuff going on, these guys still do it. And why do they do it? Well, the reason is because of desperation, and it's out of fear, I would say. That's a more accurate term, because they're in this relationship with this average to below average woman, and they, are a little bit on the fence, and a lot of them will even know in their mind that, they're not 100% sure if they want to be with this woman long term. They aren't sure if they know that they could do better in future, if there's another woman out there who will be as good, if not better, than the one that they're currently with. So essentially, they are fearful of breaking up with a woman and going back on the dating market, which they know is a complete mess right now, is super competitive, harder than it's ever been in all the 100,000 years of human history. It's a complete nightmare, and they are thinking back to the times where they were rejected time and time and time again when they were single, and they were just so happy that they had that sigh of relief once they finally got into a relationship, even though they thought that they could do better and they thought that they were lowering their standards to get into that relationship. They were just seeking relief and reliability at that point. They weren't... It's almost as if, if you ever heard the concept that there's two types of thinking when you're trying to achieve your goals. There's a need to achieve, which is that you set your standards high, you want to reach the best that you could possibly do. You're thinking long term, and you're thinking, this is what I need to do in order to get to these really high, outstanding goals. Or the second philosophy is need to avoid failure. And I would say the vast majority of men that I see in relationships and marriages today, they chose the safer option of needing to avoid failure. So even though that they know deep down that they could potentially have done better if they stuck through it, got rejected another 1,000 times, and carried on improving themselves, increasing their value, and just waited, was hoping that they know that the right girl is eventually going to come along if they, try and test the sample size for a long enough period, that you see very few guys actually having that mindset, and most guys instead opt for the mindset of, oh, this is getting really exhausting now. My self-esteem is so low because I've been rejected so many times. No women want me. I'm getting barely any matches on Tinder. Oh, I'm going to have to go for the last resort option now. I'm going to have to start dating the unattractive women, the ones that, I know will probably be there for me, and they're going to accept me because they've got no other options. And most of the guys that are pursuing them are only interested in one thing and short term. If I be that knight in shining armor and actually want to get them in a long-term relationship, then that's what is going to needed to happen in order for myself to feel validated in the short term, alleviate this desperation that I'm feeling, alleviate all of this pain and put an end to the constant rejections that I'm experiencing in my dating life. So if I just go with this overweight woman, then that's going to put all of those concerns to rest, and that's why I'm going to end up going with her in a long-term relationship, even though I know deep down that I probably could do better if I stuck through it. But in the short term, emotionally, that's going to be far worse for me. And if I had to sum it up, this first point, in just a single phrase, or, a couple sentences, then that is essentially what I would pin it down to. It is either short-term benefit and long-term suffering, or you can have the opposite mindset, which is I'm going to have short-term deficit and short-term pain and a long-term benefit to my life. And when you zoom out, and it's very difficult for men to visualize their life in its entirety, because life is quite long when you think about it, especially when you think about the concept of a 40-year marriage, that you can either go through 5 to 10 years of constantly getting rejected in the dating market, knowing that eventually if you play the numbers enough times, then you're eventually going to be rewarded for your patience and end up with a attractive, pure woman, and you've been increasing all of your value this entire time, so you're eventually going to get there. Or you can adopt the other mindset where you only want to get rejected for 6 months and you throw your standards through the floor in that time in order to escape the dating market, the brutal dating market, as quick as you possibly can. But that's going to have a very, very steep cost in the long run, because you're going to be in a 40-year marriage now with some woman that you didn't really want to be with long term. And that's the price you'll end up having to pay. And when you visualize it in that sense, you can absolutely see why it makes sense to be more patient, carry on increasing your value. And, without sounding too much like a red pillar here, I'm not talking about, let's all go monk mode for the next 20 years, wait until we're 40 years old and be a beta bucks for some single mum. No, I'm not talking about that. But if you're 20 years old now, there is no reason whatsoever that you can continue to build value once you're 25. That's 5 years. Or even worst case, do it 10 years and you're 29 years old. If you're in that position and you've built a lot of value in that time, then you're still going to have good dating options. You're not excluded from the 20 to 25-year-old women at that age point. Once you're 35, 40, then yeah, fair enough. The 18 to 21-year-olds are essentially out of reach. And more likely, if a woman is 18 years old dating some 40-year-old guy, it's either out of money or it's out of that she's got some sort of issue and, daddy problems. I hope you understand the point I'm trying to get to here. So if you're in that position, then of course, you've left it a little bit too late. But the point that I want to drill home, and I want to get guys who are watching this video out of the mindset, is that if you're like 18, 19, 20, 21, or even like 22, 23, 24, 25, then there's no rush. You've got time, and there's no reason that you should drop your standards after the first 10 girls that reject you and settle for the overweight woman who you know that you could do better than, just because you're feeling desperate, you're feeling like you need some comforting in the short run. Like, have a little bit more discipline, have a little bit more patience, and you're going to be rewarded in the long term once you get the marriage that you actually want for the next 30 years, and you're going to have a great family, you're going to have a great set of children, and you're going to raise them properly, and that's actually what's going to be the difference in terms of your long-term happiness. So that's the first point I wanted to break down. As for the second most important concept, which is equally as important and is another reason why most guys end up settling, because they don't understand that in the dating game, in relationships, marriage, you only have to score once. That's literally it. You don't need to score 100 times and, keep up some game where you're constantly chasing all of these hotties and you need to get every single one of them into a relationship. And that's why so many guys are afraid of rejection, and they end up lowering their standards because they think, oh, if I approach this woman and I've done it 50 times and they all rejected me, then that means that I'm not good enough for any of them anymore, and I'm going to have to drop my standards to a woman like this. But what these guys aren't understanding is that you only need to score once, and 50 rejections, and most guys haven't even been rejected 50 times in their life. Most guys drop their standards to the overweight women, the 4 out of 10s, by the time that they've been rejected 5 times. It takes that small of a time in order for them to go for the settlement and woman that they know that they can do better than. But even if you do 50, which is way above average in terms of the number of rejections until you drop your standards, to me, that is still nothing. That is absolutely nothing. That is not a credible sample size that you can bank on and, say that you've given it enough attempts. Like, once you reach 1,000 plus, then fair enough, you might need to change up your strategy, maybe reduce your standards a little bit. But doing it 50 times, you can easily do 50 approaches in the space of a month worth of rejections, and you're expecting your ideal dream woman to be handed to you after just 1 month. It's never going to happen, or at least the probability is extremely, extremely low. And the way I like to put it when it comes to this concept of you only have to score once is, imagine you're spinning the roulette wheel. You're spinning the roulette wheel, and your dream woman is like one number that you've got chips on, and that's the chance that that woman will end up accepting you, and all of the other ones are rejections. And add one more point to it, is that you can never lose money. It's that you can put on as many chips as you want, you can carry on betting as many times, and you're essentially just waiting for that one woman, for that one number to eventually come through. And when you think about it that way, if you only put chips on the table 50 times before quitting, is it possible that your number will come through? Well, there's 36 numbers on a roulette wheel, so, a few guys, in fact, the majority of guys, it will eventually come through. But for a lot of men, it won't in those 50 attempts. But if you do it 1,000 times, it's almost guaranteed that your number will eventually come up. And that's when you're going to find a woman like this. And notice how for this particular woman, I've not picked an unbelievable stunner, an 8 or a 9. This is, a 6 or 7 out of 10 woman. And if you take away the makeup, potentially she's even a 5, 5.5. This is extremely obtainable. Any guy who is at least a 6 or above can get into a relationship with a woman like this, provided he's average height or above. You get the idea. Or if we just simplify things and say he's a 6 SMV or above, every single guy who is a 6 SMV or above can get a woman like this, a 6 or a 7, into a long-term relationship, and she's pure, she'll be a good mother, and you know that it would be worthwhile long-term. So I want all of you guys who are in that position as being a 6 or above to get this visual image of this woman in your mind solidified, and when you're out and you're thinking of dating women and you're doing approaches, whatever it may be, swiping through women on dating apps, this is your benchmark, and you're thinking, right, this is the kind of woman that I have enough SMV to be worthy of. Obviously, the vast majority of women who are on this level will end up rejecting me, but I'm waiting on my number to come through. I know it's going to take so many rejections in order to get there, but there's so many women in the world. That's such an important concept. There's so many women out there in the world nowadays. You're never going to run out of options. As long as you're in a city of, say, 200,000 people plus, there's so many options. There's so many women out there that look like this, and it's basically impossible for you to exhaust all of them and eventually run out of options, and in which case you would have no choice but to settle for the unattractive women. So that's what I'm trying to get in your guys' minds today. If you think about these two concepts that I have outlined, the fact that the woman that you marry is the most important decision that you'll ever make in your life, and the fact that you only have to score once, if you keep repeating those two concepts over and over and over and over again in your mind, it guarantees that you're never going to be in the position of a guy who ends up settling for a woman like this, and you know that you only need to play the numbers enough times, go through all of those rejections, and eventually your number's going to come through. You're going to find a woman like this who you've always been thinking of, and you can get into a long-term relationship, and she's eventually going to be the mother of your children. You're going to have a great family, you're going to have a great life, and that's what's going to make the difference in the long term once you live happily for 40 years after that.